the Jacksonville Jaguars are on the clock in the
Let's
NFL
do
draft,
it.
which begins Thursday. And some kind of breaking news right, right before we started the show. They have signed their left tackle, Cam Robinson, to a contract extension. That tells me that they're probably not going to be taking one of the offensive tackles with the number 1 pick. So I'm thinking that the Jaguars, the first pick of the NFL draft is going to be an edge rusher. So that's where we are going to start our look on the defensive side of the ball with the edge rusher position, which I think if you kind of grade the positions in this draft along with wide receivers, it's probably at the top. Maybe offensive tackles if you really like a few of the guys once you get past the top 2, which I think there are still good ones, but I still think it's mostly a 2-tackle class. But so a lot of mocks for the last few weeks have had Aidan Hutchinson going to the Jaguars. Lately, we have seen Georgia's Travon Walker kind of becoming the, trendy pick for the Jaguars at number 1. You looking at the edge rusher class here with Hutchinson, with Walker, with Kayvon Thibodeaux, George Karlaftis, Jermaine Johnson. Who's your top guy? And if you're the Jaguars, who would you be taking?
It's a really interesting question. I think I would roll the dice with Walker just because of the athleticism, but he was not super productive at Georgia. He was kind of raw coming out. I mean, he was a dude who was like literally playing stand up, and we all knew eventually he would be a hand in the dirt guy. I do think he also offers some positional versatility. Like, you're not going to have him playing stand up a whole lot, but he can play more of a true D end, even at his size, which is really impressive. Like he's a thick dude, but he also can play more of that, 5'6" tech if you need him to. I don't know if you want to go 4-eye in the NFL with him, but the athleticism's off the charts. I think his best football is probably ahead of him. And if I'm picking number 1 overall, I want a guy who I feel like has significantly more upside to still unlock, or is just already a total stud. And I think you can make an argument for a lot of these guys, right?
Yeah.
With Hutchinson, he was super productive. If you look at how he was productive, I will note like a lot of his production came on inside counters, and inside counters work better if dudes are afraid of your speed to the outside, which in college, I think more guys probably were of Hutch than they will be in the NFL. So that's not me saying he won't be good in the NFL. I think he probably will be really damn good. But I do wonder if the NFL guys who have better balance and better reactive quickness, if they're not so worried about the outside stuff, do they stone some of his inside moves? So Walker makes some sense athletically. None of these guys, I think, are locks to be all pros. I mean, with Thibodeaux, you hear a lot of these draft dudes talking about dedication to the game. I think that's a question that's been asked since he was a recruit. And yet he still played really well when he was healthy. So I think he'll play pretty damn well. Like, he may not be a guy who maybe doesn't want to play 15 years. Maybe he's like one of these Barry Sanders types. Like, all right, cool, I played, I'm out, I have some other interests. But I think while he plays, he still plays good.
Yeah, I think like when you look at these guys, like Hutchinson to me is a high floor option in that I don't know if he's going to be a star. Like you said, I don't know if he's going to be a perennial all pro, but it's weird because a few years ago, like when I had to do after whatever 2-3 drafts ago, I had to do my way too early mock draft for the next year. I had Hutchinson in there, but I had him going as like a late first. I think I had him at 22nd or 23rd, whoever the team was at that point. And so obviously I've always thought this guy's an NFL talent. And now the fact that like he's going to be a number 1 pick, I'm just kind of like, I don't know if I ever saw that. Of course, he has improved a lot, and he had a very productive season for Michigan last year. It's just I don't see like the super high ceiling kind of pass rusher that you'd probably want to be taking at number 1. Now, maybe that's just the fact that he's at number 1 in the conversation speaks larger to this draft class overall. But I think that he's a guy who's going to be a solid NFL player for a while. I don't think he's ever going to be a league leader in sacks. I don't think he's ever going to be like the highest paid edge rusher in the league. I just think he's going to be a dude who he's going to play for a while. He's going to get 7 to 10 sacks a year, and you're never going to be complaining about having him. But one of the concerns that I have, like when I broke down, I'm looking at his games this year, and one thing that stood out to me, like he had some big, like against Ohio State, he was an absolute monster. And he had a lot of great performances as far as, putting pressure on the quarterback and getting sacks in Michigan's biggest games. But there was only one game this year where he did not have a single pressure or a single sack. Do you have any guesses which one it was?
I do. It was the game where if you asked me to pick out who's going to be the number one pick in the NFL draft, I would not have picked out anybody on Michigan's defensive line.
Yeah, like against Georgia, he was not erased, but he was not nearly as effective. And I look at that Georgia offensive line, and I'm like, that's a lot closer to what he's going to be dealing with on a regular basis at the NFL level. So for me, that is a concern. For Travon Walker, the thing that's hard for me to get my brain around is I agree. He's a tremendous athlete. And when he went to the combine, like what he's able to do there, it's like, of course, teams are going to fall in love with him because it's like, holy crap, look at the size of this guy and look at what he's able to do compared to what these other guys are doing. It's like, duh. And some of it is the scheme at Georgia where he wasn't really asked to be the pass rusher kind of guy. It was like kind of, just being in a role. But it's just when I watched Georgia's defense last year, and again, we talked about it all season long, there's so many phenomenal players on it. He was rarely the guy that stood out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like there were other dudes on that line who stood out more frequently. The linebackers stood out more frequently. Like he was doing a lot of grunt work. So I have to give him credit for that. And maybe he's just a really good teammate. Maybe the fact that he's willing to sacrifice some of his own potential stats or plays to help the rest of the guys kind of speaks to maybe how successful he'll be at the next level and why you would want him on your team. But I'm still somewhat hesitant about taking that with the first pick of the draft. And then, as you said, with Thibodeaux, there are definitely love plays.
So,
Tom,
I kind of like that. So Walker was rated super highly as a recruit because of that freaky size speed combo. And I kind of like that he was willing to do some of the grunt work at times, even as a guy who you would think of as like, hey, like, use that speed off the edge pass rusher. I mean, he did drop down inside a good bit. The question there is going to be just can he develop those pass rush moves? Can he be somebody who's truly a threat off the edge? Can he convert those testing times into flying around the edge and really being somebody who applies that edge pressure as well as being able to drop inside some? But I agree with you. Like I do think. Is there anybody you really feel great about taking with number one in this draft?
No.
Not really. Like
no,
they could work out great, but yeah.
I mean, that's like going to Thibodeaux now, like you mentioned, like the questions about his love for football and all that kind of stuff. It's like he's my number one player in this draft just because I feel like when he's playing and he's healthy, he's capable of doing things. Like it's not just size, athleticism, test numbers, and production. It's just watching him on the field. Like you'd watch him and it's like it was never hard to figure out who the best player on the field was every single time he was out there. So to me, that stands out. And there were loaf plays, and that's a concern. It's just for me, I care about the quote unquote desire or love of football as far as evaluating prospect. It's just that's more of a tiebreaker situation to me when it's the players are comparable. I don't know how many players in this class are really genuinely comparable to Thibodeaux as far as a talent and size and measurable combination. So for me, he's the number one, but I understand why some teams would be scared off.
I will say edge rusher wise, I don't think Jermaine Johnson is going to go number one overall or anything like that.
No,
but I will tell you, like Florida State's coaches, they not only do they love his production, they love that kid as far as like what he did coming in, transforming some of the culture, establishing the work ethic, and that's rare for a transfer to do that. Like, I think Jermaine Johnson's going to go in the top 10 tonight. I think he's going to go over some guys that people will be surprised about because I think he's going to, like, you see him in person and you're like, whoa, okay, this guy's legitimately like big. I mean, he's like 6'5", 250, 260. I think they're going to say, yeah, okay, he's going to be productive. He's going to be a culture guy too.
He's got some of the most impressive tape of all the edge rushers in this class. Like when you watch him last year at Florida State, he was, kind of like in that Thibodeaux mode where you were watching and you're just like, he's the guy that's just completely flashing. Now, some of that was the fact that like when it comes to the Georgia guys, it's hard to stand out on that defense with all the guys that they have. So when you're looking at the rest of Florida State defense, of course, he's going to be the guy standing out. But no, he's a really good player. Now, you're right. I wouldn't be shocked if he goes top 10. Another edge rusher who could go top 10, but I think is a safe bet to be in the first round at least. I wouldn't take him in the top 10. George Karlaftis from Purdue, who, like, at times when you would watch Purdue this year, I would audibly chuckle just because he was so much stronger than the offensive tackle or sometimes even the guard or the tight end that was forced to try to get in front of him, and he would just overpower them. My concern with Karlaftis is I feel like he's already tapped out. Like, I think he already is who he is, and he's probably gonna be like, I think he's been who he is for the last few years, honestly. I don't know how much more maximum there is, but I think that that could be a very solid kind of player at the big level, kind of like another Purdue edge rush from years past, Ryan Kerrigan. I think Karlaftis could be a Ryan Kerrigan type. Uh, how about a sleeper? Like you mentioned Jermaine Johnson. Is there somebody else who might not be a first round pick, but you think has a possibility to be a very productive NFL player and might be a steal for somebody?
Is Kyrie Elam considered a first round lock?
I mean, at the edge rusher spot,
Oh, at the edge rusher spot. I guess a Jabo maybe.
depending on the
Just
injury.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Will somebody sneak up and get him? I think there's kind of a legitimate 4 or 5 that could go in the first round here, and then I think there's a bit of a drop off. Do you have a sleeper you like?
And there's two. I like Arnold Ebiketie, who's from Penn State, a transfer from Temple. I just think he needs refinement with his hands, especially, but he's got good bend. He's twitchy. I think he's a guy who, if you polish him up a little bit, could end up being pretty good, especially in the right defense. And then another guy who I feel like I've been on him. He's kind of old now. At least for the draft. He's 23 now, but he's been a guy at Minnesota who has shown flashes, and he's been on Bruce Feldman's freaks list for the last few years. Boye Mafe, I think, is a guy who, with a little more refinement, could end up being somebody who's very good at the edge rusher position.